just before he was executed, he revealed a dark secret and shocking story. This child was about to lose his life in the electric chair, but just before being executed, he said something in his last words that made them turn it off immediately. Nico, a humble boy, walked barefoot through the dusty streets of his small neighborhood, where the laughter of children playing mixed with the sounds of daily life. His mother, Sophia, worked as a housekeeper in wealthy families' homes, and sometimes Nico would go with her to help in whatever small ways he could. His days passed with the simple joys of childhood, never suspecting that his whole world would soon be shattered. That morning, as the sky began to cloud, Nico was outside his home, kicking a makeshift ball he had crafted from scraps. Suddenly, the loud wail of police sirens tore through the calm air. Neighbors began peeking out of their homes, curiosity piqued by the unexpected commotion. Nico watched, confused, as the police car stopped right in front of him, and officers stepped out with tense, serious expressions. "Nico Rivas," one officer called out, stepping toward him. "You are under arrest." Sophia emerged from the house, a bundle of clothes in her arms, and froze at the sight. She ran toward her son, wrapping her arms protectively around him, her face full of confusion and fear. "What are you doing?" "He's just a child," she cried, her voice full of desperation. One of the officers pushed her gently but firmly aside. "Your son is being charged with theft," he replied coldly. "That's impossible. Nico has never stolen anything in his life." Sophia protested, her voice shaking as she tried to stay calm. But the officer ignored her, handcuffing Nico's small wrists. The boy stood motionless, barely able to understand what was happening, his heart pounding as the realization of danger began to sink in. Nico was pulled into the police car as he glanced back at the faces of his neighbors peering out from windows and doorways, their expressions turning from curiosity to judgment. Tears welled in his eyes, but he was too shocked to speak. Sophia chased after the car until her legs gave out, collapsing to her knees in despair as whispers of doubt and cruel gossip began to stir around her. At the police station, Nico was placed alone in a cold, dark room. His small, trembling figure was a picture of fear and confusion. An officer entered the room with a stern look, holding up a photograph of a diamond. "Nico Rivas, you are charged with stealing a diamond valued at $100,000 from the home of Valentina Morales," he stated. Nico's eyes widened in disbelief. "I didn't steal anything," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. But the officer stared back, unflinching and skeptical, making it clear that he didn't believe Nico's pleas. The pressure in Nico's chest grew as every second passed, and he realized no one in this room cared about his innocence. Meanwhile, in her luxurious mansion, Valentina Morales sat at her desk, a satisfied smirk spreading across her face as she reviewed the police report. Seated in a lavish armchair, she glanced over at the velvet-lined box where she usually kept the diamond, now conspicuously empty. For her, the plan was unfolding perfectly. She needed a scapegoat to divert attention from a far darker secret she had buried within the walls of her home. Valentina, a woman who had built her empire on deception and manipulation, rose and regarded her reflection with satisfaction. She knew exactly where the diamond was, it lay safely in her own personal vault. But she had orchestrated the theft as a cover, and Nico, a defenseless child with no means of fighting back, was the perfect target. "Poor thing," she muttered to herself mockingly, "what a shame." But Sophia didn't give up. Denied access to her son, she frantically sought out anyone willing to help clear his name. She knocked on the doors of various lawyers, but each refused, not wanting to face the power and influence of Valentina Morales. Finally, she found Enrique, a young lawyer known for defending underprivileged clients, and pleaded with him to take on Nico's case. In his modest office filled with stacks of paper and old books, Enrique listened to Sophia's desperate story, her voice hoarse from worry. "My son is innocent," she insisted. "He couldn't have taken that diamond. He's barely even inside the house when he comes to help me." Enrique's expression was both compassionate and determined. "I'll help you," he replied at last. "But going up against Valentina Morales won't be easy. Her influence runs deep, and this case might be more complex than you realize." Sofia nodded, clutching her hands tightly to hide the tremors. "I just want my son out of this nightmare. I don't care what it takes." Meanwhile, Nico sat alone in his small cell, hugging his knees to his chest. He could still picture his mother's face, worn from years of hard work but always full of love. The thought of her suffering pushed him to find the courage to face his situation, and deep down, he knew he couldn't give in. The trial began a few days later, drawing a crowd of reporters, curious onlookers, and locals eager to witness the scandal. Valentina entered the courtroom confidently, exuding an air of control and power. Nico, on the other hand, walked in nervously, his hands trembling as he tried to avoid the eyes of the spectators. His mother sat nearby, her gaze full of both love and worry, her heart breaking with every second. Judge Moreno, a stern man known for his unforgiving rulings, presided over the trial. Valentina took the stand first, delivering her account with icy composure. "The boy was working in my house the day the diamond disappeared," she said with a chilling certainty. "No one else was in the room but him. That's when I knew he had taken my jewel." Her words pierced Nico like daggers. He couldn't understand how someone could lie so easily, with such a cold disregard for his life. His breaths grew shallow as fear tightened around him, realizing how powerless he was in the face of her manipulation. Enrique tried to expose inconsistencies in Valentina's story, but she answered every question with the skill of a practiced liar, leaving little room for doubt in the minds of the jury. The tension in the room grew with each exchange, and Nico felt as though the walls were closing in around him. Despite the lack of physical evidence, Valentina's word and her social influence kept the accusation strong. But Nico's mind drifted to something he had seen on that day in her mansion, a confrontation, a heated argument, something darker and more sinister than the theft of a diamond. In that memory, he saw the flicker of truth he desperately needed to hold on to. As the trial paused for the day, Nico sat alone in the waiting room, his body trembling as he recalled every detail of that encounter in Valentina's mansion. He had seen her arguing with a man who held a small, velvet box in his hands. Could this be the key to proving his innocence? He was terrified, but he felt a faint spark of hope. Facing Valentina Morales and all her power seemed insurmountable, but he knew that revealing the truth was his only chance. The next day in court, Nico finally summoned the courage to tell what he had seen, describing the man in the velvet box in detail. The revelation sent a shockwave through the courtroom, casting doubt on Valentina's story for the first time. Judge Moreno ordered an immediate search of Valentina's personal vault, and, to everyone's astonishment, the missing diamond was discovered, hidden exactly where Nico had suggested. Caught in her lie, Valentina could no longer deny her deceit. Her carefully woven story unraveled, revealing her plot to frame Nico to protect herself from blackmail and to silence anyone who knew too much about her dark dealings. Nico was declared innocent, and the courtroom erupted in applause as Sofia ran to embrace her son. Through tears, Enrique looked on proudly, knowing that he had helped restore justice in a seemingly hopeless case. In the aftermath, Nico's story spread far and wide, inspiring many with his bravery and determination to reveal the truth. He became a symbol of resilience, proving that even the most powerful lies could crumble before the courage of a single, unwavering voice. The courtroom was filled with an almost unbearable tension. Nico's testimony had cast a dark shadow over the once perfect image of Valentina Morales, revealing a hidden truth that sent shockwaves through everyone present. What had begun as a trial over a stolen diamond had turned into something far darker, a battle not only for Nico's freedom but for justice itself. As Nico spoke, his voice steady despite the weight of his revelations, every eye in the room turned from him to Valentina. The powerful woman who had once exuded unshakable confidence now looked cornered, her polished facade finally cracking. Judge Moreno, an experienced man who had seen his fair share of cases, took a moment to consider the magnitude of what Nico had revealed. His gaze lingered on Valentina, his face unreadable, and he struck his gavel, demanding order as the courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations and shocked gasps. He turned to Valentina's lawyer, giving him a moment to respond. Valentina's attorney, visibly shaken, stood to address the court, his face pale as he scrambled to refute Nico's claims. Your Honor, with all due respect, these are baseless accusations from a frightened child trying to escape punishment. There is no evidence that supports these claims, and they cannot be used to dismantle my client's impeccable reputation. But Nico's lawyer, Enrique, was undeterred. Rising with calm determination, he requested an immediate investigation into Mauricio Morales's death, presenting his case with precision. Your Honor, this is not a story of a child's imagination. The events Nico witnessed raise significant doubts about Mrs. Morales's innocence, not only in the alleged theft but in far graver matters. The judge looked at Valentina, who sat rigidly in her seat, her carefully constructed mask slipping as her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. After a tense silence, Judge Moreno nodded, his voice firm as he declared, "This court will initiate a full investigation into the events surrounding Mr. Mauricio Morales's death. The truth must be uncovered." The announcement hit Valentina like a blow. She sat in shock as whispers filled the room, and her once loyal supporters began to question her. For the first time, the whispers weren't about Nico's alleged crime but about her own. Nico watched the scene, his heart pounding as he finally felt the weight of his burden lifting. At last, someone believed him. The days following this revelation turned into a whirlwind of headlines and exposés. The story of the young boy falsely accused had captured the public's attention, and the media swarmed the case, uncovering new details about the Morales family's complicated history. Investigators uncovered evidence that painted a picture of a toxic household ruled by secrets, betrayal, and manipulation. The pristine image of Valentina Morales crumbled as details of her husband Mauricio's suspicious death began to emerge, painting a chilling picture of a woman who would stop at nothing to protect her secrets. Within days, new witnesses came forward. Former employees of the Morales mansion, now emboldened by the investigation, provided shocking testimony of what they had endured while working under Valentina's watch. They spoke of how Valentina controlled every aspect of her household, silencing anyone who dared to question her decisions. Her reputation for being untouchable had kept them silent for years, but Nico's courage had inspired them to finally speak out. One of the former maids recalled that Valentina had changed drastically after Mauricio's death. She was colder, the maid said, her voice shaking as she recounted the atmosphere in the mansion. She controlled everyone, every movement, every word. We all knew that any slip could cost us our jobs, or worse. Damian, Valentina's brother-in-law, became a key figure in the investigation. The man who had once stood quietly by, watching the family drama unfold, now found himself forced to choose sides. After years of silent complicity, Damian decided it was time to protect himself. In a surprising twist, he offered his own testimony, revealing details about the last months of Mauricio's life. According to Damian, Mauricio had been growing increasingly uneasy, even afraid, in the days before his death. He had confided in Damian that he feared Valentina was hiding something dangerous. The explosive nature of Damian's testimony further eroded Valentina's credibility. Her lawyer attempted to object, calling Damian's statements unreliable, but the judge allowed his account to stand, knowing that the case now rested on exposing the truth, regardless of who it implicated. The trial was becoming a spectacle, with people everywhere watching to see if the untouchable Valentina Morales would finally face justice. During this time, Nico and his mother, Sofia, remained under intense scrutiny. The media hounded them day and night, and while some reporters were sympathetic to their plight, others viewed them as mere players in a high-stakes drama. Nico felt torn between relief that his story was finally being heard and the exhaustion of reliving his nightmare over and over. But through it all, his mother stayed by his side, her unwavering support a beacon of strength in the chaos. As the investigation deepened, Enrique discovered a paper trail linking Valentina to secret offshore accounts and forged documents, evidence that further implicated her in illegal activities. This new evidence solidified the prosecution's case, proving that Valentina had not only framed Nico to deflect attention from the diamond's supposed theft, but had orchestrated her husband's death to protect her empire. On the final day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. Nico sat beside his lawyer, clutching his mother's hand, his face a mixture of hope and fear. Valentina entered, her once untouchable confidence shattered. The whispers among the crowd grew louder. People who had once looked up to her now saw her for what she truly was, a manipulative woman willing to sacrifice anyone to preserve her own power. When Judge Moreno delivered the final verdict, the entire room held its breath. Valentina Morales, this court finds you guilty of orchestrating a fraudulent scheme and wrongfully accusing Nico Rivas of theft, as well as conspiracy in the death of Mauricio Morales. As the words sank in, a wave of relief washed over Nico and Sofia. For Valentina, the realization of her fate seemed to hit all at once. Her body slumped, her face a mask of disbelief as the weight of justice finally bore down upon her. She would face a long prison sentence, her wealth and influence unable to shield her from the truth she had tried so desperately to bury. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, people astonished at the fall of such a powerful figure. Reporters scrambled to capture the reactions, and Enrique placed a comforting hand on Nico's shoulder. "You did it, Nico. You stood up for the truth, and you won." Outside, as they left the courthouse, crowds cheered for Nico, chanting his name. News of his courage and resilience had spread beyond the city, inspiring people everywhere. Strangers approached to shake his hand, commending his bravery and determination. Nico's story became a symbol of hope, reminder that even the smallest voice could rise up and bring down giants. In the months that followed, Nico and Sofia slowly rebuilt their lives. Enrique's law firm offered Nico a scholarship fund, inspired by the strength he had shown. Nico returned to school, but he carried himself with a newfound confidence. He knew now that he was capable of facing even the darkest challenges. Meanwhile, the Morales mansion was left abandoned, a haunting reminder of the rise and fall of Valentina Morales. Her name became a cautionary tale in high society, a story of deceit and corruption brought to light by the courage of a single boy. The judge's gavel struck again, commanding order, and all eyes turned to Valentina Morales, who sat trapped in the witness stand, her once impeccable composure shattered. She glanced around, desperate to regain her grip on the courtroom, but her power seemed to be slipping through her fingers. The devastating recording of her threats to Mauricio, her late husband, hung heavily in the air, casting an undeniable shadow over her carefully crafted story. Valentina clenched her fists, her face a mask of suppressed rage, whispering insults under her breath as she glared at Nico with an expression of pure hatred. Yet the boy sat resolute, determined not to let her intimidate him. From the back of the courtroom, Sofia watched her son with a mix of pride and fear. Nico had shown such bravery, but she worried about what consequences Valentina might unleash if pushed further. Valentina was a woman of influence, and even with her reputation faltering, she still had connections that could be dangerous. Enrique, Nico's steadfast lawyer, rose from his seat with a look of calm determination. Seizing the momentum from the recording, he addressed the jury, his voice ringing with conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have just heard is not merely the testimony of a frightened boy, it is the truth, a truth that has been buried beneath lies and intimidation. Mrs. Morales has hidden much more than a diamond. There are dark secrets here, and it is time for those secrets to see the light." His words echoed through the room, drawing the jury's full attention. What had initially seemed like a straightforward theft case now hinted at something far more sinister. The death of Mauricio Morales, long dismissed as an unfortunate accident, was now being questioned in the eyes of the law and public alike. In a corner of the room, Damian Morales, Valentina's brother-in-law, watched the drama unfold with wary eyes. He had stood by Valentina for years, entangled in her schemes and secrets, but he had never imagined things would spiral to this point. With each passing moment, Damian realized his own precarious position. If Valentina fell, he might be dragged down with her. He knew he had to act quickly to ensure his survival, even if it meant turning against her. After a brief recess, Judge Moreno ordered the trial to resume, and Valentina was called to the stand. The atmosphere was charged, the weight of every unspoken accusation filling the air. Valentina walked with her usual confidence, but for the first time, cracks showed in her facade. Her hands shook slightly as she sat down, her eyes darting across the room as though searching for an escape. Enrique approached the stand, his gaze piercing. "Mrs. Morales," he began, his tone firm but measured. "Earlier, young Nico testified that he witnessed a violent altercation between you and your late husband, Mauricio Morales, on the night of his death. What do you have to say to that?" Valentina's eyes darkened as she pressed her lips together. She knew that every word she spoke now carried the weight of her reputation, her freedom, and her empire. "That is an absolute lie," she replied, her voice as sharp as a knife. "My husband and I had our differences, yes, like any couple. But there was never any violence. Never." "So, you deny Nico's account entirely?" Enrique asked, slowly pacing before her, keeping his gaze fixed on her. "I deny it completely," Valentina replied, addressing the jury with a mix of defiance and desperation. "This boy is lying to save himself, and everyone here knows it. This trial is nothing but a distraction from the real issue, the theft of my diamond." Enrique gave a faint smile, as though he had been waiting for her to say exactly that. "Interesting," he said smoothly. "Because we happen to have something that might shift the course of this conversation." He motioned toward the back of the room, and a technician entered, carrying a recorder. A murmur rippled through the crowd as the technician set up the equipment. Valentina's face paled as she eyed the recorder, a sense of dread creeping into her mind. She hadn't anticipated this. "What we are about to hear is a recording from the Morales mansion on the night of Mauricio Morales's death," Enrique announced, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "This recording has been hidden, until now." The courtroom fell silent, the only sound the faint click as the recording began to play. Valentina's voice crackled through the speakers, unmistakable and filled with venom. "Mauricio, you can't do this. If you dare to ruin me, I swear you'll regret it," she spat, her words laced with cold fury. A loud crash followed, as though something, or someone, had hit the ground. The recording's impact was immediate and devastating. Valentina's face drained of color, her eyes darting wildly as if searching for a way to deny what had just played. The jury stared at her in horror, and the reporters, who had previously portrayed her as a victim, quickly shifted in their seats, sensing a change in the narrative. It was clear now that Nico's account was not a fabrication, he had witnessed a horrifying truth that Valentina had desperately tried to hide. Attempting to regain her composure, Valentina rose from her seat, her voice shaking with anger. "This is absurd. That boy is lying, and this is nothing more than a desperate attempt to frame me. You're all being manipulated," she shouted, her gaze fixed on the jury with a mix of fury and panic. But the room was no longer on her side. Across the room, Damian watched as Valentina's empire of lies began to crumble. He knew that the time to act was now. He approached Valentina's lawyer and whispered something urgent before quietly slipping out of the courtroom, his mind racing. Years of loyalty to Valentina meant nothing now. His own survival depended on distancing himself from her downfall. Back in the courtroom, Judge Moreno struck his gavel, calling for order. "Mrs. Morales," he warned sternly, "control yourself, or I will have you removed. This court will treat Nico's testimony with the seriousness it deserves." Valentina sank back into her seat, seething with rage. Nico sat quietly, watching her, but he refused to let fear consume him. He knew now that his words had sparked something unstoppable, a truth that, despite the risks, could no longer be contained. The days that followed were a whirlwind of revelations. Former employees came forward, emboldened by Nico's bravery, to testify against Valentina. Housekeepers, gardeners, and assistants described a household ruled by fear, where Valentina's temper and intimidation silenced anyone who questioned her. One former maid even revealed that she had heard Valentina threaten Mauricio in the days leading up to his death. And then there was Damian, who, in a surprising twist, had offered to cooperate with the prosecution in exchange for leniency. His testimony exposed years of manipulation, lies, and schemes orchestrated by Valentina. He described how Valentina had meticulously planned to frame Nico, knowing he was an easy target with no means to defend himself. Damian's betrayal struck the final blow in Valentina's carefully constructed defense. When the final day of the trial arrived, the courtroom was packed. Nico sat beside Enrique, clutching his mother's hand. His heart raced, but he held his head high. Valentina entered the courtroom with a hollow expression, her former air of arrogance now replaced by resignation. As the judge prepared to deliver the verdict, the silence was deafening. "Valentina Morales, this court finds you guilty on multiple counts, including false accusation, conspiracy, and endangerment of a minor, as well as involvement in the suspicious death of Mauricio Morales." The weight of the words struck Valentina like a physical blow. She slumped, defeated, as her world collapsed around her. For years, her wealth and influence had shielded her, but now, stripped of her power, she was left exposed. As the courtroom erupted in whispers, Nico felt a rush of relief. He looked up at his mother, who embraced him with tears of joy. Their nightmare was finally over. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered to cheer for Nico. News of his courage had spread across the country, making him a symbol of resilience in the face of injustice. Strangers reached out to congratulate him, inspired by his bravery. Over the following months, Nico and Sofia slowly rebuilt their lives, supported by newfound friends and allies. Enrique arranged for a scholarship fund in Nico's name, ensuring that his future would be filled with opportunity, not fear. Nico returned to school, his spirit stronger than ever, knowing that he had faced down power and corruption, and had won. The once grand Morales mansion stood abandoned, a haunting reminder of the empire Valentina had lost. Her name became a warning, a tale of how deception and cruelty could never hide from the truth forever. For Nico, his story had turned into one of hope, proving that even the smallest voice, when brave enough, could bring down giants. After the verdict, the courtroom slowly emptied, and the name Nico Rivas spread across the city in the news, now carrying admiration and respect. The boy who was once viewed as a thief and a criminal had become a symbol of courage and hope. But for Nico and his mother, Sofia, it was just the beginning of a new life, a life free from the weight of unjust accusations and far from the shadow of Valentina Morales. In the weeks that followed, Valentina was taken into custody to serve her sentence in a maximum security prison. The Morales name, which had once been synonymous with power and influence, was now a bitter reminder of deception and betrayal. With testimonies from former employees and evidence discovered during the trial, the family fortune was confiscated to compensate those who had been wronged. The Morales mansion, once imposing and luxurious, stood abandoned, a silent monument to the ruins that greed and arrogance could cause. Damian, who had tried to save himself by cooperating in the end, did not escape unscathed. Though he avoided as severe a sentence as Valentina, he was convicted as an accomplice and forced to withdraw from public life, living far from the spotlight and the privileged life he had once cherished. For Nico and Sophia, life took a new direction. Nico's story inspired a fund to help him and other children in vulnerable situations gain access to quality education and better opportunities. With the support of his lawyer, Enrique, Nico received a scholarship and returned to school, determined to build a future that honored the struggle and resilience he and his mother had shown. A few months later, Nico and Sophia were walking through the town square, now more at ease and far from the media and public scrutiny. They sat on a bench, and Nico, with a thoughtful look, turned to his mother. "Mom, I never thought I could go through all of this. But knowing that the truth won, it makes me believe it was worth it," he said, looking at the sky, his voice carrying a maturity beyond his years. Sophia smiled, her eyes still misty as she recalled the moments of anguish but also relief. "You were very brave, son. We must never be afraid to stand up for what's right, even when it seems impossible." As they talked, Enrique approached, bringing good news. The community had come together to honor Nico, recognizing the strength and courage he had shown in standing up against someone as powerful as Valentina Morales. Nico was invited to give a speech at the ceremony, and though nervous, he accepted the invitation with a humble smile. At the ceremony, Nico stepped onto the stage before a crowd that applauded him enthusiastically. He held the microphone with trembling hands, but his voice came out strong. "I'm just a kid," he began, looking at the faces of those who listened attentively, "but I've learned that the truth has a power greater than any wealth or influence. My mother always taught me that we must be honest, and today I know just how true that is." The audience rose to their feet, applauding, and Nico felt his heart fill with gratitude and relief. He and Sophia had overcome a terrible ordeal, but now they could move forward with dignity and hope. Enrique, deeply moved, looked at Nico with pride, knowing that this case would forever change his life and inspire generations to come. The story of Nico Rivas continued to spread, not just as a tale of justice but as a reminder of the power of truth and courage. The small town where he lived became known for the incredible story of the boy who stood up to a wealthy woman to prove his innocence. And the abandoned Morales mansion, now overgrown with ivy and forgotten by time, was left as a silent reminder that wealth and power could never silence the truth. For Nico, this was not just the end of a story of hardship but the beginning of a new life, one in which he knew he could always overcome challenges, for he had faced the worst and emerged victorious. And whenever someone asked him how he had done it, he would simply smile and say, "Never underestimate the power of the truth."